Okay, so in this video, I will show you guys how to use, I will show you guys how to use rvest in R to collect data. And I don't want to say the phrase so early on in the video because I don't want it to get flagged and the video get taken down. So anyways, let's jump right into it. So if you never worked with R, go ahead and search for R Studio. I think, is it this one? I think it's the first one. Let me see. Yeah. So the first thing, sure. Yeah, so the first thing you need to do is download and install R, right? So if you're on a Mac, go ahead and, hit the Mac link, and then I'm on Intel Mac, so I'll go ahead and, download that, and I won't install it since I already have it installed. And then the next thing you want to do is go ahead and download RStudio, and I already have it installed, so I don't need to do any of that. So yeah, make sure you install the language R first, and then you need to install the RStudio GUI. All right, so once you have that, once you open up RStudios, yours may look like this, and if it does, just go ahead and go to File, New R Script. Okay, if you aren't familiar with R, these are the absolute basics that you need to know. So the first thing you need to do is go ahead and search for advanced R, and it should be let me see. Yeah, so when you search for advanced R, it should be the very first link, right? So you should read through these first 8 chapters if you want to familiarize yourself with R and you want to get better at R. And then the next thing that you need to look up would be, I think it's, yeah, deployer. So this guy Hadley Wickham, he wrote a bunch of useful packages on top of RBase, and deployer is one of them. And actually, here's tidyverse. If you look up tidyverse, you go to tidyverse, right? So tidyverse is a collection of packages that let you work with data. So massage the data, manipulate data, visualize the data. And the very first one I think that you should look at is, yeah, deployer. So start with deployer. And then the other package that you also absolutely want to check out as well is ggplot. Again, these packages were written by Hadley Wickham. So if we search for ggplot, we see that we can create some very nice visualizations. And honestly, ggplot has been one of my favorite charting libraries that I've ever used. You can create some complicated visualizations with ggplot. It's an amazing library, and you should definitely check it out. So again, just to quickly recap, you should definitely, if you want to learn more about R, or if you don't know enough about R, look up advanced R, read through the first 8 chapters. And as you're reading through the first 8 chapters, make sure to play around with deployer. So this would be a nice introduction to one of the packages in the tidyverse. And also, as you're reading through advanced R, as you're playing around with deployer, you should definitely check out ggplot and play around with it. And there's actually a book as well. So if you look up ggplot 2 PDF, I think it's the first one. Let me see. This looks more like a reference. I think it might be the second one. Yeah, it's the second one. Right, so when you search for ggplot PDF, you should look for this link right here, and I'll make sure to link everything down in the description. So this book does a really good job of introducing ggplot and showing you how to work with data sets. And a lot of the times, let me see, it's been a while since I read this book, but Hadley Wickham references data sets that are built into R. So let me quickly go ahead and pull up RStudio. If I go to the console and type in diamonds. Okay, one sec. I don't remember. Oh, you know what? I think I have to do this. So library, I think it's ggplot2. Okay, I think I need to install the package ggplot. I think that's what it's called. right? So when you install ggplot, it'll also provide a few data sets just in case you don't have any data to play around with. So, after you install ggplot, you can see that we have, okay, so now that we have some data to work with, we can go ahead and, read through the deployer documentation, and we can read through the ggplot book and, learn how to use deployer and learn how to use ggplot. We don't have to worry about web scraping some data and then importing that data, and then you got to do a bunch of massaging to get it to a point where you can visualize it. And honestly, when I was using R, 90% of my time was spent importing data, like all kinds of different data. The data was always a mess, and it would take, like I said, 90% of my time to just get it to a point where I can start doing exploratory data analysis. Also, I would say take the time to look up Hadley Wickham and just go over his profile so you can see a lot of his amazing contributions to the R community. All right, so now that you've installed R, I've talked a little bit about the basics and gave you some guidance on how to get started with R. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but this is the absolute, I think, bare basics that'll get you far. So with that out of the way now, let's go ahead and look up rvest GitHub. So this is the package that we will use to scrape some data. Right, so as I mentioned, the tidyverse, you can just install tidyverse. It's a collection of a bunch of packages. And when you install tidyverse, you'll also have access to rvest, but I'll just go ahead and install rvest. I don't know if I have rvest. Let me see. Oops. Nice. Okay, so I already have rvest. If you don't, just go in the console or up here in the editor window, and you can just do that. Install packages rvest. This is update and load package. Anyway, so I already have it loaded, so that doesn't matter. Let me see. So we use this function read HTML, and we need to provide it a URL. So what it does, it'll store the HTML in this variable Star Wars. And then, so this is the pipe operator. So if I go here, it's the same. This is the same as this. So this line and this line are exactly the same. Okay, so what it's doing here, it's taking the HTML, it's passing it to this function HTML elements, and from it, this right here is a CSS selector. So it could be something like, let me see, HTML elements. So if we want to, for example, if we want to extract all the headers, or when I extract all the paragraphs, or a div element, or the body, this is where we specify what we want to extract. And you can see here that it'll create a set of nodes. It will extract all of the section HTML elements. And then, so once we have the films, we'll store this collection here. And the next thing we do is, okay, so we're doing the same thing again. We're saying now we want the header elements. So we want to extract the text, right? The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones. So what we do is, again, we're doing the pipe operator. So we're feeding films into HTML element, and we're extracting the text, and we're extracting actually the H2 element, and then we're piping that into HTML text and extracting the text. And as you can see, we have an array of all the text that was inside the h2 element. And then here it's showing you how to use attribute to get data out of attributes, for example. Right, so it's looking at this data ID attribute, and it's pulling all these the values associated with each of those h2 elements. And as you can see here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so this is cool and all, but what if you want to web scrape some data to create your own database? So I wrote a while ago, actually kind of a long time ago, I think, let me see, GitHub. Okay, so this is a, so I built a basic backend in Node.js, and yeah, as you can see, I wrote this like 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now. Anyway, so if I go to the source, here we go. So here's a bunch of data that I web scrape. So here's the script. As you can see, it's not that complicated. But like 40 lines of code. I was able to scrape data for Barcelona from 2004 to 2020. And if you go ahead and open up one of the CSV files, you can see I have the name of the player, appearances, goals, and a bunch of other stats. Right, so in R, one important thing to note is that R is vectorized, so meaning anytime you find yourself writing a for loop, you should avoid it. And R, you don't want to do this because the for loops are built into R. So what that means is that if I have, let me see, let's see, R1, array 1, I can do array 2. All right, so this is the command to create arrays. So when I say R is vectorized, that you can go ahead and do this. So array 1 plus array 2. And as you can see, it's taking each individual element. It's taking 1 and adding it to 1. It's taking 2 and adding it to 2. It's taking 3 and adding it to 3. So this is one of my favorite features of R. The fact that the loops are built in, it makes it really, really easy to work with, arrays and matrices. Very straightforward. So anyways, anytime you find yourself wanting to write a for loop, don't. You want to use, so there is these functions. I think it's supply, supply, and apply. And to look up the documentation of a function, I think it's, help, and then you pass the name of the function. So in this case, apply. Okay, so anytime you find yourself wanting to write a for loop or writing a for loop, don't. Look into these functions, apply, supply, and apply. Learn how to use them and learn what they are. Anyway, so let's go ahead and show you how I web scrape this data. If we go to that URL, you'll see Barcelona data. And I just simply, I think I did 2004. Yeah, because I think the one before that, right, there was no data available. So I just went to the very first one that had data available. And then at the time I went up to, I think 2020. Let me see. Yeah, I just went up to 2020. And if you pay attention to the URL, you see that it's changing, right? 2015. And then if I hit 2021, you'll see 2021. And so using that information, and also the cool thing about R2 is that you can create vectors by just giving it a range. So like if you say you want to create a vector from 200 to 300, it creates a vector starting from 200 and then ending on 300. And so this is what I'm doing. And again, this is the pipe operator, and I'm feeding it to the as character function. And as you can see, it's creating a vector of characters, or you can think of it as a string. And let me go ahead, I'll just go ahead and copy all of this. Let me see, am I missing anything? Right, and then lists. Right, so once I have the base URL and once I have the season years, I want to create the season URLs. So what I'm doing is, right, so what paste does, it takes the base URL, a separator, and then an array. And what it will do, it will create a unique URL for each year. So if I run that code and then we just inspect the season URLs, we can see that we have 17 URLs, right? One for each year. 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, up all the way up to 2020. Right, so here we're using the vector function, and you can think of a vector as an array. And here we're telling it, so we want to create a vector of type list, and we want the length to be the length of season years. Right, so a list in R is a very special data type. If you ever worked with JavaScript, you can think about it as kind of like an array that can just hold anything, right? It can hold an object, it can hold another array, it can hold a number, it can hold the string. So lists in R are very flexible. You can store another list within a list, you can store a model in a list, and you can store a data frame. And honestly, to learn about everything I'm talking about, just read through those first 8 chapters in Advanced R, and it'll talk a lot about, what an atomic vector is, your basic data types in R, what lists are, what data frames are. So those first 8 chapters are very important. And if you really want to learn R, you need to make sure to read those chapters. Oh, and another important thing about R is when we are iterating over an array, we don't start at 0, we actually start at 1. And so this is nice. Actually, I got very used to this. But anyways, this is how we would write a for loop in R. And again, you normally wouldn't want to do this. So for each season URL, we're reading the HTML and we're storing that HTML in a variable. And then what we're doing is we're taking that HTML and we're piping that into HTML nodes. And here we're using CSS class names to select that particular container. So if we go back to the ESPN website and open the inspector, the DevTools, and we start to look for, let me see. Right, so here we can see these class names, right? Class table. And to extract these class names, there is a browser extension that you can use. Selector gadget. Right, so it should be, it should be the second one. Right, it's this one. So what you do now, I think I already have it saved. Let me see. Where is it at? Okay, I'll go ahead and delete it. So what you do is you just go ahead and bookmark it. Selector gadget. And I'll go ahead and put it in my toolbar. I'll save and I'll make sure to bring it up here. So now anytime you visit a website and you want to scrape some data using rvest, you go ahead and click on selector gadget. Oh crap, what did I do? Okay, the wrong link. Okay, let me delete the bookmark, do this, bookmark link, do the same thing again in toolbars, and I'll bring it back over here. Okay, let's try that one more time. So if I go to back to this URL, okay, let's try one more time. Right, so anytime you visit a website and you see some data that you want to web scrape using rvest, make sure to install this selector gadget. You save it as a bookmark and then you click on it. And so now, if you look down here, it's saying no valid path found. So if you start just clicking on items, as you can see, it'll start giving you the CSS class names. And then the more you click on them, right, you kind of have to like play around with it. And right, so anything that's in yellow, this is what will be web scraped. So you'll get the title here, Barcelona squad, and you'll get both of these tables, right? Goalkeeper tables, and then the outfield players, and this is the CSS, right? You just take that, you copy, and you would paste it in here. But I already took the time to do that. So after playing around with selector gadget, this is what it returned for the column names, and this is what it returned for the season data, or the data in the table. Okay, so now as you can see, I'm extracting the column names, right? So I'm feeding the HTML into HTML nodes. I'm using these CSS class names to select those specific HTML elements that have these class names, and then from there I'm extracting the text. And similarly, again, I'm feeding the HTML into HTML nodes, and I'm looking for the HTML elements that have these class names, and then I'm extracting the text. And so now that I have the season data, I'm taking all that and I'm passing it to matrix. So what it does, it'll create a matrix for you. You can pass it the number of columns you want, and then by row true. I don't remember what that means. So I'll just go ahead and look it up, right? Help, it'll tell you. Right, see, if false, the matrix is filled by columns, otherwise the matrix is filled by rows. And then once I create the matrix, now I actually want a data frame. And as I mentioned earlier, the book Advanced Art talks about all of this. And okay, so now that I have season data frame, I'm looking at the column names of the season data frame, and I'm replacing those column names with the column names that I extracted up here, and I'm just making sure I lowercase all of those column names. Okay, so this is how you can subset data frames, right? Or this is one way. And because this column name num doesn't exist, it'll just create a new column name and it'll append it to the end of our data frame. And so what I'm doing now is I'm actually taking the column name, I'm subsetting the data frame, and this is how you do it with this the dollar sign. It's kind of weird, but you get used to it. So I'm taking that column name, right? So I'm taking all of those items and I'm piping it into string match. And so what this is doing is using a regular expression, and it's returning one or more digits. And then down here, I wrote some comments here. I'm removing any special punctuation from player names to avoid issues when I'm generating the SQL commands. So again, I'm subsetting the data frame. I am replacing the column name with this new information. So it'll take all of the names in the season data frame, it'll pass it into this function string match, and it will look for all of the, I think capital D is I think it's Word. Yeah. So if I look up regular expressions, cheat sheet, right? So capital D is not a digit. Okay, so capital D is not a digit, and then the plus, if you go back over here, yeah, it's one or more. And then I'm passing that result into string replace all. And I'm looking for any special punctuation, so I'm getting rid of that. And then finally, after we created the season data frame, for each year that we have specified up here, we're just passing in the season data frame. We're piping that into the select function, which is from dplyr, and then we're selecting the column names, all of the column names from name all the way up to age. So any column names in between those two will be selected, and then similarly too, we're selecting column names, nationality, all the way up to num, and selecting any column names that are in between these two. Okay, so now if we run this, we should get a list with 17 data frames. Okay, we actually need one more library, which I think it's called stringer. Yeah. Okay, one more time. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that you should avoid using for loops and instead use lapply supplier applied. So before we move on, I will refactor this code and do just that. If you take a look at this tab, I've already gone ahead and refactored the code. So it's exactly the same. The only thing I did now is just I took all the code that was inside the for loop and created a function. And so this is how we would define a function in R. And also, before I forget to mention, a lot of the times when you look up examples, you'll see this assignment operator. I believe it's referred to as the gets operator. So it's just an old way of doing assignments. When I was first learning art in all of my lectures, this is what we would use. But over time, I thought it was annoying to type and can be confusing. And I just decided to switch over to the normal assignment operator that we are all used to. Okay, so anyway, so the code here is more or less the same from the code in here. Right, so the only different thing here is that once I select the columns that I want to work with, I'm passing these columns to mutate all, and mutate all is taking this function, and then I'm passing this string. So NA-if, this is how we represent missing data in our NAs. So if I go ahead and look up help NA, yeah, so it's either not available or missing data. And this is one of the very first things you want to do when you're importing data is you want to check for missing values and replace those missing values with NA. And if we go back to the ESPN website, if you look closely, here we go. So they decided to represent missing data with 2 hyphens, which is fine and all, but when you import data into R, it's annoying that missing data, there really is no standard from what I remember. We would import data in all different formats, and someone decided to represent it using some other convention. So again, as I mentioned, this is one of the very first things you want to do in R. Just look for missing data, and missing data, it's going to come in all shapes and forms. So it can be tricky to identify all missing data. But once you do, it's pretty straightforward to replace all those instances of missing data with NA. And if you take a look at one of the data frames that I created, you can see that we have NA instead of having these two hyphens. And same as before here, just, again, the base URL, the season years, right? So let me go ahead and load all this. Right, base URL, season years, and then season URLs. Right, so for apply, the first argument is usually either a vector or a list, something that we can iterate over. So if we take a look at season URLs, we see that we have a URL for 2004 and then all the way up to 2020. So what apply is doing is taking each URL and feeding it into extract season data, which is a function. And if we look here, we've specified the parameter name, which is URL. And so this function is being executed, looks like 17 times. And then for each season year, we're extracting all the data in these tables. And here we're just cleaning the data and turning it into a data frame. And then here we're just subsetting the data, and then again we're just looking for any missing values and replacing those values with NA. And then the return value of apply. So if you look over here, I've explicitly created a vector of mode list, and so season list it still is a list. If we take a look, season list. Oh, I haven't ran that code, so I'll go ahead and run it. So it will take a little bit. Right now, if we look at season list, we see that it's a list of 17 items, and each item is a data frame. So here, Loply is implicitly creating a list for us under the hood. And let's go ahead and quickly just, again, view the data. So we're viewing one of the data frames in the list. It's the very first one. So I know that I mentioned that you shouldn't use for loops in R, but I think this is a good use case for a for loop. Right, so I tried using Apply to write a CSV file, and in the process it was returning a list with, again, 17 items, but each item was initialized to null, and not really what I wanted. So the more I thought about it, I think in this case it makes sense to use a for loop because the code is pretty straightforward and easy to understand. And before I save these CSV files, I will go ahead and change my working directory. So I'll go ahead and save it into here. And then I'll bring up this directory and get rid of these files. And now I'll go ahead and run this code. If we look here again, now we see that we saved each of the CSV files. And if we look here, we see that any missing values are represented with NA. Okay, so the next step would be, well, what I did was I wrote a few functions in Node.js, and I iterated through each CSV, and then I created a table for each CSV in PostgreSQL. And then I wrote a simple Node.js backend using TypeScript, and then I played around with HTMX and EJS, and I'll go ahead and bring that up. Right, so here are all the functions that I wrote to read the files into memory and then dynamically generate these SQL queries to populate the database. And if I bring up the database, So if I bring up that database and I look at the tables, you can see that I have a table for each year that I web scraped. So now I can bring up the query tool and just do something like this. Select star from season 2004. And we see that we have data. And so I wrote a very simple, here we go, let me bring up the router. So I have these two endpoints, season and seasons. And here are my controllers, right? Retrieve season and then retrieve seasons. And here I'm just using raw SQL. And here, since I know missing data is represented by an A, I can just do a very simple filter to just get rid of any missing data. But actually, let me just go ahead and bring up the app. So now it should be running at local host. Okay, so I need to fix some of the padding, but this is it. Right, so here I'm displaying the players for each season, and then I'm displaying the top goal scorers of that season. And then for, I think 2009, we don't have any data. So I was just playing around with Daisy UI, which is built on top of Teldon CSS. And then I think 2020, yeah, we also don't have any Barcelona data. But if we go to 2010, we see, right, we see another graph, 2007. Right, so hopefully you guys can see how I use R. I don't really use it as much as I used to, but this is how I generally use R. I, it's hard to come up with your own data, and I'm really into football, so I thought this would be a good project for me to web scrape some data from the ESPN website. And I've done it with Node.js, but I just didn't like it. In the back of my mind, I knew that R was way better for this because I've just had so much experience with R. And of course, you can use Python as well to web scrape data and to visualize data. And overall, I just didn't like the developer experience. And at the time, when I was trying out Python, I had already been using R for a couple of years. And it was very hard not to compare it to R. And on top of that, R is a statistical research language. So if you want to try out any cutting edge statistical like models, you'll find them in R. Anyways, I hope you guys found this video useful. Please like and subscribe.